Good evening, everyone. My name is Leslie Scott Jones, and I am so glad to open this lecture series, the Evelyn Barbour lecture series, for the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center. Tonight, Dr. Andrea Douglas will be having a conversation with 4 amazingly talented Black women who are journalists in Charlottesville. And we hope that you can glean something not only about their life, but about how they interact with our town and how they craft the stories that we all hear about Charlottesville. Just a little bit about Miss Barbour, if you don't know about her. Evelyn L. Barbour passed in 2014 at the age of 78 after a short illness. She attended the Jefferson School and was among the first graduating class of Jackson P. Burley High School. She was an alumna of Virginia Union University and the University of Virginia School of Education. She taught in various school systems and retired after more than 30 years of service. She was a lifelong member at Mount Zion First African Baptist Church, and her most notable work in the church was her role as historian. So this series celebrates Ms. Barbour's work documenting the history by creating these her stories to share with Charlottesville. So without further ado, I will invite the panel in, and we can begin our conversation with all of these amazing women.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here and having this conversation. We've been thinking about this conversation for quite some time. And really, I cannot think of a better way to start this lecture series than a conversation with the 4 of you. There's so much going on right now. You're all in the thick of it, and wanting to understand how you came even to be in Charlottesville and in this career, I think is part of it. So let me very quickly introduce each of you, and then we'll get to it. I'm hoping that we'll talk for about 45 minutes. I have some questions, and then we'll go to the audience questions. And so if you have a question, please go ahead and put it in the live comments, and I will ask it. And it's completely empty, and therefore there's reverberations. So let's get to it. So first, let me introduce Brielle Ensminger. Brielle, say your last name for me.
It's Ensminger. How it's basically how
Ensminger.
Not Ensminger.
Okay. I didn't know if it was a gur or a gur. Brielle got her degree in 2019 in media studies from the University of Virginia. She is a Emma Bowen Foundation alumna, Weldon Cooper Center for the Public Service intern, and now a Siebel Weekly News reporter. Next, we have Mariah Davis, who graduated from Hampton University. She's a national association. She's part of the National Association for Black Journalists, the Kappa Tau Alpha Honor Society. She was once the intern at WABY-TV and now an NBC 29 reporter. We also will be talking tonight with Lottie Lockhart, who went to George Mason, interned in the Obama White House. So we'll be, and she's a former NBC 29 anchor and producer, and a member of the School Nutrition Association. And then finally, we have Briana Hamblin, who also got her degree from UVA in media studies. She was once she was a Cavalier Daily writer, the founders of Orsier Noir, a member of the National Association of Black Journalists, founder of the NABJ UVA chapter. We'll talk about that. I don't know what that is. And now CBS 19.
I just want to add really quick that Brielle actually
excited to having. Sure.
I also just want to add that Brielle was also part of that founding group that started the NABJ at UVA chapter. So I'm sure both of us have a lot to say about it.
Okay, good. Because I know nothing about it and I want to hear all about it. So now that we have two founding members, that's even better. So let me just say that the reason why we decided to start this series is because this is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And that's the amendment that gives women the right to vote. And in thinking about what that amendment actually meant and the way in which Black women had always been involved in the suffragist movement, but however, at the passing of the 19th Amendment, weren't able to vote because of the poll tax. They would have to wait 3 years before they were able to vote. So wanting to sort of honor Black women have always moved this country forward, whether they had the actual ability to do that in a sanctioned form. And so, as I said earlier, this conversation with the four of you feels like this is the very right place to start, because in some ways you're at the beginning of your career. You're thinking about this kind of weight. So why don't we just start out with us getting to know each of you. So Lottie, tell us a little bit about how you decided to become a journalist.
All right, thanks, Andrea. So I actually fell a bit into journalism. I did have an incident. I came back home to Charlottesville, where I had grown up and gone through the Albemarle County public school system. And I had minored in journalism and just felt that it was something I could try. As you mentioned, I am really at the start of my career. Working at NBC 29 was certainly an introduction to that world. And although I don't work there right now, I do hope to continue to amplify especially the voices of Black women reporters, because we can tell stories that other reporters might not think about, might not have access to sources to. And that was honestly one of the greatest parts of being a reporter for me, was being able to make those connections that some of my coworkers weren't able or possibly weren't willing to make to tell those stories.
Yeah. And how about you, Brielle? How did you decide to become involved in journalism?
So yeah, when I was in high school, I knew I wanted to do writing because that's more of my specialty. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I was interested in journalism, but I just knew I wanted to do the media studies program when I got into UVA. And then once I started taking more classes at UVA and fortunately found out about the Emma Bowen Foundation program, which is basically they set you up with internships wherever you live or where you go to school. And it's for students of color specifically. So I was set up with Charlottesville Tomorrow, and that was my first real journalism gig. And after doing that internship between my third year and fourth year of college, I knew that journalism was something I was really passionate about and had gotten a little bit good at. So I knew that after I graduated from college, I was interested in some sort of journalism job. And fortunately, Seafield Weekly hired me. So I kind of just found my way into it.
Mm-hmm. And Mariah, how about you? How did you get involved in it?
Hear me? Okay, cool. So it was actually kind of weird how I got into journalism, actually. So back at the church I went to with my parents back home, so I would go to church every Sunday, and they would ask me to read the announcements. They were like, oh, can you get up in front of the church and read the announcements? So actually the night before, on a Saturday night, I was watching the news with my mom, and I was like, oh my gosh, I just think like news people are so cool. I would love to like be on the news one day. And then the next day at church, I actually got up and read the announcements in front of the audience. And after that, the pastor actually got up and was like, you know, I think, you know, you would be great, like speaking in front of crowds and like doing news. So kind of for me, that was kind of a confirmation that I'm actually in the career that I'm supposed to be in. And so that's kind of how I started really developing my sense of news, kept watching it. And then it just happens that I'm from Hampton. And so, you know, I went to Hampton University and they have the great Scripps Howard School of Journalism and Communications. So I decided to go there, had great professors. And fortunately for me, a lot of my professors were actually news reporters and anchors on TV. So I got that great mentorship. And then I didn't want to, starting out of my career, I just kind of wanted to stay closer to home starting out. And Charlottesville is just 2 hours away from Hampton. So it kind of worked out so well for me, how I was just immersed in kind of like a journalism standpoint. I had a college right there and with mentors that were actually on the news, and then be on a TV station that has so much history around me. So that's pretty much, I'm really grateful that, you know, I started out here at NBC 29. I've learned so much while I was here. And so that's just kind of how I got started.
And Briana, how about you? Tell us about how you got started, or what made you want to be a journalist.
Yeah, so I always knew I wanted to be a journalist. I think I was pretty confident in that by high school. I'd always been a writer and a storyteller. I would always like keep a journal and just tell stories growing up. And my family was also a heavy news watching family. We'd always have the news on right before dinner as my mom was cooking. And so I was kind of like had my mind set on that. And when I got into UVA, I knew I was going to major or be in the media studies program. And luckily they started to grow their journalism classes within that department. And so I took all of their broadcasting classes. And then how I ended up in CBS 19, actually, so during my first year, a lot of news was happening. That was like 2014 to 2015, a lot of news was happening. So I actually would see reporters like on grounds all the time. And I actually went up to one of the reporters at the time and was like, hi, I really want to be a reporter. Is there any way I could talk about an internship and tour the station? And it really took off from there because I got a tour of the station, was offered an internship that next summer. And I just always kept my foot in the door with CBS 19. I was telling the news director at the time, Val Thompson, let me know if I can do anything. I would always make sure that I make time to follow the reporters, even when I was back in school in the semester. I eventually got hired as an editor. And then my last semester at UVA, Val Thompson went ahead and offered me the reporting job. And I was like, yes, sir. So.
Well, you guys are very driven and very well prepared for the lives you've chosen. And I think that, this idea of there was a lot of news happening, you're really cutting your teeth on some really interesting times right now. I mean, certainly within the last 2-3 years, the last 2 years even, what we're going to do in July, this thing, fodder for women who are driven and have had this desire to tell stories and be involved at this level. So the question I'm wondering is, in terms of, and Lottie, you touched on it just a little bit, in terms of the fact that you're all sort of Virginians, number one. Number two, that there is so much happening in the state of Virginia. How does your sort of identity as Virginians influence the way you're thinking about the kinds of stories that you go after?
I think, if you all don't mind with me starting, I think being from Virginia, and especially being in a place as special and as in the news, especially as it has been, as Charlottesville, you have to learn really how to tell those balanced stories. And for us, that means, we're talking to basically every single person we can. But especially here in Virginia, I do think that we as women of color, we face different challenges than a lot of our coworkers. If someone tells me, go to the courthouse and get a story on someone who's, defaced the Lee statue, or go get a story on someone who is in trouble for threatening a person of color, and they want me to get up close and personal with that person, I may have to approach that really differently than a white male coworker. So I think that we do have to sometimes approach these stories differently, but it doesn't change, at least for me, the kind of core work of, it's just my job to get there and to get the facts, and then to tell them in a way that makes people want to do something. If that something is to tweet about it, great. If that something is to think about something in a different way, awesome. If that something is to go out and protest, I didn't tell them to. So I think it can be really interesting.
I think also being from Virginia. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I think also being from Virginia, Virginia has so much history when it comes to especially like race relations. And we were like the founding state, one of the founding states. So knowing that and growing up knowing that, helps you also for looking for stories. And it's unique because if you go to I remember I was interning, or not interning, I actually interviewed with a Midwest state recently. And when you're looking at others' news, the lights just turned off in here. The whole race relations and like history you realize is really unique to Virginia. And that's such an important story aspect here that isn't in other places.
I think we've lost you a little bit.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Can you just go back just a little bit, because I think you went out just for a minute. So you started to say about being from Virginia and the history. Can you sort of repeat where you went from there?
Yeah, I was just saying that I think knowing the history of Virginia has so much history. It's really important because a lot of their stories go back to that when it talks about the Lee statues and race relations, and when schools actually integrated that. When you go to other states, like let's say the Midwest or even out west, that's not the same. So I think Virginia is really unique in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how about Maureen? Go ahead.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of what Lottie said, just like, Virginia being a very history-driven state, it just reminded me of one of the stories. I won't go into full detail, but it just kind of reminds me of when Governor Northam, everybody found out, he did blackface back in the day. And so in our Month Star meeting, we have a newsroom meeting, morning meeting. Our boss was saying how we should do this and we should do that or whatever like that on these different types of stories. But one of our other reporters, he's not with us anymore, Lowell, he actually had mentioned to our boss earlier in the week that we should do these stories. And so he felt that our boss wasn't giving us enough leeway to do more coverage of these stories, like where the history of blackface came from, why is it important that we not just say like, oh, Governor Northam did blackface and, it was wrong, but actually finding out the history behind blackface. And so us as Black journalists, I feel like it is very important for us to bring that perspective to the newsroom, to not only, mostly just to push and get the word out there about why these things are wrong and bring a different perspective into the newsroom. So it was great that me, Lottie, and Lowell kind of like put ourselves together and kind of told our boss and explained to him, this is why we should, do more on this story and get the word out there about why this is wrong, instead of just saying it, but actually digging up the history behind it and getting like the full context of what needs to be put out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I would just agree with what everything else. But everything else that everyone said. I think for me, for my position at Seaville Weekly, it's been really important that I'm not just from Virginia, but that I went to UVA because we cover UVA issues all the time. And especially being a Black student at UVA, when I was there, I know about so much stuff or experienced so many things, either like racial issues or microaggressions and so many things that people who aren't Black might not know about and might not be able to report on the same way. So yeah, just even with the whole UVA sports logo thing going on, I'm sure you guys found out UVA changed their sports logo again because of the whole serpentine walls thing. And for some people, including people that I know, they had certain non-Black people had no idea about the serpentine walls. Meanwhile, this is something I've known about since either at least my second year of school, just from being a Black student and learning about Black history, or I think I might have even learned about it before I went to UVA. So there's just so many little things that it's just important that I did know that and had that in my mind when we're writing certain stories about UVA.
So your personal experiences do then play into the way in which you do some of your reporting, largely because it allows you to at least find a framework for it, even though you're still trying to give the facts and report the facts. I find that really interesting because having sort of engaged with each one of you, you always sort of come to the conversation with a point of view and with something that you are attempting to uncover. And I find that kind of interesting in terms of the way one thinks about the idea of news, because news allegedly is unbiased. News supposed to just allow you to understand the space of things. So how hard is it for you to balance this your sort of identity with your general life experience in this place, and then this need? Because I find it interesting when, Lottie, when you said, other reporters don't have to contend with this in the way that you all would. So how do you find that place? Where do you know that you've gone too far or that you need to go further? You haven't gone enough.
Well, first of all, news does try to be as unbiased as possible. And that's where checks and balances, producers and news directors come in partially. But another part of it is, we code switch all the time. I code switch with coworkers, and even when it's just you and me talking, Andrea, and the camera has stopped recording, we can talk and speak differently with each other then. So in a way, staying unbiased isn't hard because it's something that we have to do constantly. It's just tapping into that a little bit more, I think. And, I'm for sure one to push boundaries, I think, with news and making sure that it is personal, but that's what storytelling is. It's telling someone's personal story. And if I don't get personal, then I might not tell their story as well. And I think that would, kind of neglect the job of news, which, yes, is to tell an unbiased story, but just because it's unbiased doesn't mean it can't have a personal touch.
Right. So let me switch tacks for a minute, because I'm interested in the environment. Is it uncommon for there to be 3 Black people at CBS 19? Is that the way all news?
So I've only been here for 2 years, technically. I know it's me, Rick, Darnell, and then we have Leandra and Chelsea. And I mean, since I've been interning here, there's always been other Black reporters. I know Stefan Dingle was here. Shernay is my mentor to this day. You do pay attention to when stations have, because when you research other stations, the first thing I do is look at their employees. And if there's only like one token Black person or none at all, that is concerning to me.
Yeah. How about for the other, is that why you picked,
Oh, is it me?
Or are those things important? Sure.
Well, I really do think that it is important for a TV station to kind of represent what newscasts they put out. So a lot of these areas, they don't have as many Black journalists. For a long time, all you see is kind of like the standard journalist, like white girl with blonde hair or brown hair or whatever like that. But now, a lot of Black women are starting to add diversity, just like with the way they look in their appearance. And so even here in Charlottesville, back when there was Madison Carter, for a long time, she was the only Black journalist. And then they had Lowell come in, which is a Black journalist. And then after that, it kind of picked up from there because me, Lottie, and then we had another person, Madison, and now we have Daniel. But I'm leaving soon. And then Madison, she no longer works there. Maddie, she no longer works there. Lottie no longer works there. I'm leaving. And so Daniel is going to be the only Black journalist. They've hired a lot of new reporters, but none of them are Black. And so Daniel is going to have to carry the weight of being the only Black journalist on his shoulders now, which is very disappointing. For me, on my perspective, that's very disappointing. I don't know if any Black journalists didn't apply or what happened with that, but Daniel is going to be the only Black journalist at NBC 29 for however long until they hire more people. But I really think it is very, very, very important to have some Asians, Koreans, Chinese, different foreign people, Black people, to connect with all different types of audiences. Because in my experience here in Charlottesville, I have had people reach out to me when I go to stories and say, I want you specifically, or Lottie or Lowell, to cover our story because they're like, we feel more comfortable talking to you. And I feel like if you have diverse reporters at your news station that people feel comfortable talking to, you can get much better quality stories because people will be more willing to speak to you and do stories with you. And you have very different stories and much better quality of a whole newscast when you have different people that represent your station working there.
Yeah,
and I think it's really important that, like what Mariah said, when you have one reporter, the weight is on their shoulders to make sure that the Black stories get done. So having more than one is also important because that's just a lot for someone to handle. Like that's a whole population of people that you're concerned about, that you feel like you need to represent, and that shouldn't be on one person's shoulders.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. And piggybacking off of that as well, it shouldn't just be people of color. It needs to be people of color who maybe look different. Not every one of us needs to have straight hair. While I was working at NBC 29, there was a conversation and they asked me, well, can you straighten your hair once you're going to anchor? Because we'd like a more consistent, typical look, but not all Black girls wear their hair straight every single day. And that's not something you should have to compromise on just to be on the news. Once I did straighten my hair, we ended up getting a lot of messages from people saying, why would you do that? I liked being able to see someone who had hair like mine on TV. And it's really a letdown. But when it comes down to it, if my boss tells me you have to do this or you can't do your job, I have to do it.
Right. All right. And Briana, how about you? What do you think about that?
I just wanted to agree again with everything Mariah was talking about, specifically with the importance of having not just Black representation, but all sorts of non-white representation at your news station. With CBIL Weekly, unfortunately, as I'm sure you guys heard, we did have to lay off, well, not me personally, the owners of the newspaper did lay off several people at our newspaper. And there was one other Black woman working there in the advertising department, but now I am actually the only one left. And it's just us, me and one other guy who is the news reporter. And I've had, I believe, 2 activists or maybe even more tell me when I was doing a story about the recent Black Lives Matter protest that happened about 2 weeks ago, that the only reason they even really wanted to talk to me was because I'm Black and they trust me and they've seen my stories before, been reading them, and they know I'm going to tell the stories the way they should be told and not misconstrue them. So and that was like really, I guess, heartwarming to me to know that there's Black people in Charlottesville that are reading my work, appreciating my work, and feel like they trust me to tell their stories correctly. And it does make me sad sometimes that I am like the only person. We are a very small paper, so granted, we can't have a bunch of Black people there. But it is sometimes sad that it's like sometimes on me to really have that pressure to make sure that all these different Black issues are being covered, and I can only do so much as one person. So it does make me happy, though, that at least at places like CBS 19, NBC 29, there have been a lot more Black journalists, even though they're sadly leaving or already left, as Mariah was talking about. But I really do hope that more young Black journalists that are graduating or that are UVA or wherever they are will come to Charlottesville, because we need even more, and we need even more other minorities too.
Yeah,
we need more, and we need to pay them more, because Black journalists coming right out of college cannot afford to live for $25,000 a year. And that every single one of the journalists I know was getting help from somewhere. Journalists need to be paid more, but especially Black and any journalists of color, because it's a lot of work and it should be paid as if it's a lot of work.
Yeah, and that actually was my next question, because having been here for as long as I've been, there's always kind of a turnover of you all. So we get used to speaking to one journalist, and then within the next year, there is kind of a whole new crop of people who we have to meet and know. And I wanted to ask a little bit about that. I mean, we understand this is your first job, but what's it like? I mean, we've been talking about different things, but what's it like to be a journalist in Charlottesville?
I will say I was lucky enough to be able to live with my parents. So I did have privilege there, but I do like to keep track of a budget. I try to have my finances in order. And I can say that without the support of my parents, there would have been no way for me to do this at all. I would have had to choose between rent and food on more than one occasion. So I'm really lucky, but the next Black journalist who applies for that job, they might not have parents who can say, it's okay, you can just live with us. The next Black journalist might not have family friends who say, oh, it's okay, you can stay at our lake house or anything like that. And so we need to help take care of journalists. And that shouldn't just fall on community members having to send us gift cards for food or for Bodo's Bagels, although those are appreciated.
And that's like across the industry for small markets. That's not just Charlottesville. Like, that needs to change everywhere for smaller markets, because it really bothers me that you really do have to have a certain amount of privilege in order to even start in this industry, because I'm still on my mom's health insurance. Sometimes I have to ask my mom for help. And if I just didn't have that level of privilege, I just wouldn't even be. And even like the unpaid internships, like I wouldn't even have been able to get experience if I didn't have my parents willing to help me. So as an industry, that really hinders diverse groups from joining.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's it like to be a journalist in Charlottesville? That's a funny question. Very funny question. I will say, well, I'm speaking for a lot of journalists out there, this career field is not for the faint of heart. It's absolutely not. As journalists, we bust our tails all the time, from trying to contact all these people, sending out these emails, making these calls, just to find people to do stories with us, for people to hang up on us, be very, very rude, turn their noses up at us. They don't like the media or whatever like that, but we're not the enemy. And it's just, the pay sucks, but a lot of journalists, they do this because they really do want to make a change in the world. And, in their minds, one day I know all this hard work is going to pay off. In the summertime when it's 90 degrees outside and you guys are chilling at the pool and people are doing whatever they want to do, we are out here carrying around 40 pounds of equipment, we are setting up our tripods, pulling out our cameras, and doing all this stuff. When it's raining and pouring outside, oh, guess what? You still have to go outside, do your live shot. Is it snowing outside? It's very cold outside. You're freezing. It's okay. You have to still go out there, do your live shot. And so it's just not for the faint of heart. And a lot of people get out this business because of the pay and because, they don't enjoy doing it anymore because a lot of pressure is put on us as journalists. But I think that it's just, if it's really your passion and what you want to do, then you will succeed. And I have no doubt that these amazing ladies here, and even though a lot of got out the business, be successful at whatever.
Lottie, are you gone for good?
I like to never completely close a door, but I have left journalism for right now. I have switched into PR. I am enjoying my PR job. I am enjoying that increase in pay for sure. But, absolutely, this job might not be for everyone, but everyone should have the opportunity if they'd like to try. So, I think that does loop back to, we need to make sure that this isn't a job you can only have if you have a certain amount of privilege.
Right.
And for the turnaround that you see too, a lot of it is because you're supposed to get slightly paid more at the next job, and you're supposed to have possibly a cameraman at the next job, which still that's even changing. MMJs are kind of you're required to be your own cameraman at even bigger cities. But that's also why we kind of push ourselves to keep moving on from cities, because we're trying to get a little bit better, a little bit more pay. We're still passionate, but we need to get a living wage. So I want to have a family one day. So
I'd like to not ask my mom for money.
I would say since I am the only print journalist here, I don't have the exact same struggles. Fortunately, I don't have to go outside to do my work most of the time. We've been working from home now because of coronavirus, so I've been working in my living room, but it's still it is still a lot of work, and you have to be willing. I think really whatever type of journalist you are, whether you're print, MMJ, you have to be willing to put in those extra hours without any extra pay. I get the same paycheck no matter how much I'm working, and usually it is at least 40 hours. Maybe I've stopped counting now since I've been working at home. Sometimes I'll be working early in the morning, sometimes I'll be working late into the night, working all day. Have to watch city council meetings. Those take up basically your whole evening. So much stuff that I've just gotten used to. And I know it is really not for everyone. I have been fortunate to get paid enough to always cover my bills. And I do have a roommate. I don't live by myself. It's way too expensive here. And I do have my parents who, if I absolutely need help, they do help. But I just do know it is a very hard job, and I do think definitely that the people at CBS 19 and NBC 29 need to be getting paid more from what they told me.
So that brings me to this idea, though. How do you create the kind of continuity in a community then? If there are certain kinds of barriers to your ability to stay in a position and grow in a position, how does one then begin to create a continuity of voice? And are you going to be able, in your minds, as you move along, continue to have the same kind of voice in the kinds of reporting and the kinds of stories that you're interested in doing? Who wants to grab that question?
So I guess I'll start with this one. In my opinion, I feel like this is just where networking comes into play. It's just all about networking. Wherever journalists go, especially in a new area, new environment, it's all about, who can I contact? It's all about making those connections, making those contacts with people. So the more people you get out in the community, you speak with, you talk to, that's how you can get your voice heard. the more people you go out and speak with or whatever, people will, and then once you get established in that area, people will start reaching out to you. Once they start to know you, they start to trust you, they really enjoy your stories, they will start coming to you. You don't even have to, well, in my experience, like, yes, when I got here, I went out into the community, like introduced myself to people, but after a while, I didn't have to do it anymore because a lot of people know who I am. I get emails and texts and calls and people reaching out to me wanting me to do their stories. So, and then you just bring that perspective into the newsroom because, once you get, basically local news is all about the community. So if the community is reaching out to you, telling you stories and what they would like to hear from, then you take that and you tell it to your boss and your other coworkers and you share that with them, and then that's how you keep up your voice in the community. In my opinion, that's how I would do it.
But this question for me goes just a teeny bit deeper. I mean, I understand that you're making those relationships and whatever, but there's something to be said about spending time, almost embedding yourself in a space in order to understand the nuances. Charlottesville, for me, feels sometimes not like any place I've ever been. So is it possible in your minds or in your minds, have you spent enough time here that when you were reporting today, or, when you were reporting, that you felt like you had also gotten to kind of understand the undertones in a story or the nuances, or allowed to be able to figure out what to pull and push on when you're talking to people?
I think what Brielle said earlier, being a UVA student helped me a lot with that because UVA has its own history, and then you learn how it permeates throughout the rest of Charlottesville. So when it comes to learning, the nuances of what to look for and what to ask for in stories, I think being a student has helped me personally.
Mm-hmm. So you all have really actually 7 years of experience here as opposed to 2 or 1 is what you're saying. That sounds,
yeah,
for some of you.
Being a Black student at UVA, I'm from Stafford, Virginia, but being a Black student at UVA was still a culture shock. So I'll just leave it at that. I had to learn a lot.
I've been in Albemarle County since 2002. And, as much as I would love to think that I know everything about Charlottesville and the history there, every day, someone will say one thing and it'll almost make a connection in my mind to, oh, well, that would have impacted this and that as well. And it's crazy to think about all of the ways that people and events in Charlottesville and even the surrounding area are connected. And then when you also think about the history behind all of those things, it can be really tough. Sometimes it can be a bit discouraging, but I think the thing that I always try to just keep in mind is if I'm not telling these stories, and if people like me are not telling these stories, and if people of color and women of color are not trying to tell these stories, who's going to? Because, they could be ignored because they have before. But I think having us in journalism really does make a difference.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Brielle? How do you feel about it? Because again, you're the sort of token print person here. So what do you think about it?
Sorry. I'll just go off of whatever Briana was saying. I definitely agree with, just like I was saying earlier, about having my UVA experiences really have given me maybe further insight, I guess, into Charlottesville issues. Because for when I was at UVA, a lot of my news and knowledge of Charlottesville was coming from the UVA bubble. But even then, just knowing that stuff, like say a few months ago when the whole coronavirus pandemic started, we did cover a story about UVA laying off their workers. Well, Aramark technically laying off their dining workers. And I didn't cover it. One of our freelancers did. But still just having that knowledge of like what it's like for at least knowing some of those Black workers at UVA and recognizing them and like remembering talking to them and having just knowing how much UVA controls the lives of so many Black people here in Charlottesville has really guided me to want to like further deep dive into those types of stories.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to open it up to audience questions. So I'm going to look at what questions people might have. But while they're doing that, I'm going to ask all of you a question. What's the most interesting, best, scariest, craziest story you ever covered? Pick anyone you want to tell me about.
For me, I think craziest would have to be a plane crash. We heard over the scanner, newsrooms typically will have a police scanner, that, there was a plane that said that it was going to go down. And I said to my boss, hey, I think you should probably send, someone, possibly me, because I heard it out there. And he said, oh no, like people like think a plane is going to crash all the time and it's not going to happen. And I ended up having to spend a day out in the field. Thankfully, the person flying the plane was fine. He walked up and shook my hand immediately after we got on the scene. But it was just a crazy day. And I think all the time, hi, Daniel. I think all the time about, what might have happened had we just not paid attention to that. And, the same can be said for so many stories, but there's an insane amount of stories, and I've loved getting to tell so many of them. Mm-hmm. And for me, I definitely take them home with me. So if I've ever interviewed you, probably try to find it later on, either because I was shocked by you and think you're amazing, or because I'm very sorry that I had to talk to you on a terrible day.
What about you, Maureen? What about you, Maureen?
Yeah. So it was such a long time ago that I did this story, probably within my first couple of months of being here in Charlottesville, but it was very bizarre. So we got this email from Monticello saying that this parakeet had landed on their property. So they found this parakeet, and it's so funny because they actually like posted the parakeet like online, and then this owner claimed it. Now this owner lived probably like 2 hours away, and so they had this crazy kind of reunion on the lawn at Monticello of this parakeet. So I got the reaction online, and the lady, she's like, she has such a crazy bond with this bird, and she's like, oh my God, my bird is parakeet. And the bird is just like talking back to her. And it was just the funniest story about this lost and found pet that landed at Monticello. And I love Nat sound. Nat sound is like the natural sound. So I actually got really close up to the bird and recorded the bird saying all these crazy little sayings, and I put them in my story. And to this day, those memorable stories, the older lady and her little bird, she was just so happy to be reunited with that bird. It was just the cutest thing. It was so funny.
So how about anyone else want to answer it? What's your craziest, most interesting list of that kind of story?
I would say that when I think of the craziest stories I had to deal with, it was actually like my first summer working. And I think part of that was because I was working on the weekends. And when you're on the weekends, it's just, at least at CBS 19, it's just you and the producer / anchor. So you get sent to crazy things. So actually the very first time I went live was also a plane crash. Literally was not even taught how to use the TVU that lets you go live. So I rush over to do this plane crash report, and I'm calling Tyler Hahn at the time was the anchor / producer. And it's like literally 2 minutes before he goes on air. And I am like frantically asking him, like, how do I turn it on? Where do I put this cord in here? He's on the desk telling me how to do this. And then it's also terrifying because you have to get used to going live. And so being thrown for that to be my first live shot was quite the experience. So I ended up pulling, like, I think a firefighter was right next to me. And I was like, hi, tell me everything live on TV because I don't know enough to say. But it ended up working out. But yeah, I feel like my first summer working is when I had to go to all the fires. It got to a point where I would get work done and then try to run out as fast as possible because I was like, the last thing I need is 4 or 5 minutes before me leaving a fire to be called because that just happened. So yeah.
Isn't that the worst, Briana?
Yes, like literally the amount of times that I've like packed up to leave and then they're like, actually, can you run and get video of this fire? And then you're there for another like hour, 2, 3, who knows? Oh my God, sorry. I just thought of there was a scene once that I ended up literally working till like 4 a.m. So like, there's some PTSD with that.
For real, have you had to, I mean, have you had sort of something that falls under any of those headings?
I wouldn't say I don't have anything exactly crazy that I like to the extent that they went through myself. From something that I wrote so I have like 2 things. Something I wrote that I know that I was just really maybe not crazy, but like just very eye-opening was when my first cover story I wrote for Seatbelt Weekly was about basically the whole Rolling Stone rape case that happened 5 years ago at UVA. Well, I guess almost 6 years ago now, and like how things have changed at UVA. And I was able to talk to like several people at UVA about their experiences with and their views on sexual assault at UVA, and it was just I do know like victims and like have heard their stories just from when I was at UVA, but it was still this even more eye-opening to see just how big of a problem it is. Obviously not just at UVA, but all Scott colleges, but it was just really, and then obviously I was able to see like more UVA, like what they have been doing over the past few years, stuff that I didn't even know about. So yeah, that was definitely just very important. One of the most important stories and stories that I'll always remember working on. And I worked on it for like a month. So it took a lot of my time. And then something that I didn't personally write, but as you guys, I'm sure you guys remember, I think about 3 months ago, there was a guy who took the slave marker near the courthouse downtown, and he walked. So I wasn't there. I think I actually was working on a different story, like either at home or at a coffee house or something. But my coworkers told me that the guy who stole it, I think his name's Richard something. I'm forgetting now.
I don't remember.
Yes.
Someone knows. Someone who's watching this knows.
Yes, he came into our office and just like admitted to it. Richard Allen, I think. It was this old white guy. He just like came into our office, admitted to it. He sat down with I believe our editor at the time, and like did like a tell all, and it was just crazy that day. Like it all happened within like the extent of the day. Like, him coming and talking to us, and then us publishing the story. And then I know we published, like, he wrote his own op-ed explaining why he did it, and we had to publish that. So that was just like a whole crazy few days at the paper. And then eventually, I think he did get arrested, but then he got I think he got out on bail. I can't remember, but yeah, it was a lot.
We've got a couple questions. So one of them is, what sources have you found to be the most useful for digging deeper into important local stories?
For me, I think a lot of it has been historians and or just people who know a lot of people. So it's not even necessarily someone who wants to talk to me, wants to be on camera, but if they say, hey, I know about this thing and you need to talk to this person who works here about this, and I bet that they would talk to you. And if I mention that person's name, the other person will normally talk to me. So honestly, a lot of it is really just kind of related to what Mariah said, just networking and getting to know as many people in the community as you can and getting to know them well, not just on kind of a base level.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories that I did was actually one that I teamed up with Jordy Yeager. He did a print piece on the history of Garrett Street, and we agreed that I would do like TV segments on it, which is great because obviously print, you can put in so much more information, and his whole segment on it was amazing. But between talking to him and he also really helped me get, the sources I needed for that story. And that ended up being like one of my favorite stories because I just learned so much history of like what the Black community looked like at UVA, or not at UVA, in Charlottesville before urban renewal. So yeah, shout out to Jordy Yeager.
So his turn. So another question, what local story would you like to cover most?
Oh, how did I know y'all gonna click on me? What local story would I like to cover most? You know what? Come back to me on that.
All right, I'll give you a minute. Anybody else want to tackle it?
I personally know that the stories that make me excited are kind of the social justice stories. The ones where I feel like a group of people are really trying to fight for change, and I'm helping to be the voice on that. And I think that's a passion that I'll, carry with me everywhere. But people here in Charlottesville are extremely passionate, and I love that about the people here.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a question, and we've got actually two questions because I've got one here too that are very similar. So this one is, in all of your experience in Charlottesville's news reporting, how do you feel about the independence of your work and your ability to influence the narrative of the story? Do you have a lot of control over your ability to write the story that you want to write?
I think it depends. I think it depends on the producer and the news director, honestly, who are reading your story that day. And also if there's breaking news, how busy we are generally. But, if you pitch a story and they let you do it and you write it and then they want to change it, you can, argue your point. And I know I've done that on more than one occasion and probably annoyed everyone who had to read my story and reread it. But it's definitely a give and take.
Yeah.
How
about anybody else?
Yeah, so you definitely do have a lot of freedom to choose what kind of stories you cover. Like Lottie said, it is ultimately up to the news director about, if he feels like it's something to cover. But then again, if you really want to do the story, you'll argue your point. You say, this is why I think we should do the story. This is who I think it would impact, and this is how I'd write it. And so every journalist has their very own distinctive voice, and a lot of people in the community that watch our stories will probably just, look at the story or kind of can read the article and be like, oh yeah, I know that Mariah wrote that, or I know Lottie wrote that, or Briana or Brielle, because we just have our very own distinctive writing style and the way we tell a story. And so I really do feel like producers and news directors, they shouldn't try to change the way that a journalist tells a story unless it's just, dead wrong or wrong information. But having the freedom to actually tell a story that's accurate and a way that is engaging is very important to me personally. And I feel like, journalists should have more freedom to, pick and choose what they feel is most important, besides like breaking news and just other like community events, but things that you have to dig deeper with, and like feature stories and other stories that people reach out to you on. I feel like it's all about how the journalist tells a story through their voice that will make that person proud, and that they want to get that word out there and share it with other people.
Yeah, because we've only got maybe time for 2 more questions, but we're getting a little bit of complaint about feedback. So if you're not talking, can you mute your mic? Because there's a lot of feedback. I'm hearing it too. Okay. And Leslie, I don't know what that means for your production thing, but that's all on you. I don't know how to do any of that. So there is another question. Let me find it. If you all had a chance to work together on a story, what type of story would it be? Do you all have enough of a voice to be able to do that?
I don't know that NBC 29 and CBS 19 would be allowed to work on a story necessarily together, but we definitely show up at the same stories often, I would say. I'd love to work with all of you on anything because you're amazing and inspiring. But, you know, I would hope that it would be something about social justice and social change in Charlottesville, if anything. So if you need a cameraman or camera woman, you know, on a weekend, let me know. I'm not
You can
cheap,
haul a camera.
but I'll come back for Bodos. And my mom's cooking.
I think we'd be a great podcast, literally talking about anything.
That'd be great. I mean, we'd all listen. I think that would be an amazing thing. So we're going to wrap up, but I think the last question I want to leave you with is that question, is the sort of question that is at the core, at the heart of why we're having this conversation. How much impact do you think you have on policy in Charlottesville? And you don't have to be like, oh, I don't know. I mean, I want you to be as brazen in this answer as you can. Thinking about the stories you've written, thinking about the places you've been, how much impact do you think you've had?
As a reporter, I don't think that technically I have any impact on any policy. As someone who asks questions of leaders, of politicians, of really anyone, and someone who's amplifying the voices that are also asking those questions, I would say that we can have an impact. But if we reach the point where everyone is just fine with how everything is going, then I think that journalism would no longer have an impact. So as long as you all have questions and tell us that you want us to ask those questions, journalists will do it. So let us know. And if you have questions or complaints about anything, call your local station. That's where bigger news gets their stories from. It really starts at places like NBC 29, Seville Weekly, and CBS 19. And we've seen that, especially in Charlottesville.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Okay, I will.
Go ahead, Ria.
Yeah, I would say that, like, I think really what we choose to cover does have an impact on the policy. Like, just like me by myself, say I'm writing a story, I'm not the one that's like, oh, making such a big change in Charlottesville. But depending on what I'm choosing, who I'm choosing to interview for the story, which, how many people I'm able to interview, how diverse the interviewees are, how long the story is. Like, there's so many different aspects of the story that can make a long-term change. Say when we, again, bring up that Aramark story that I didn't write, but one of our freelancers wrote, who was a UVA student, or she just graduated. I do believe UVA probably would not acknowledge it, but I do believe us covering such a big story and that story getting such traction online, and who knows how many people read it in our physical newspaper, did lead UVA to at least try to help their Aramark workers. So there is the journalists by themselves, maybe like we can't do that much by ourselves, but by people reading our stories and getting inspired and talking about it and protesting and sending emails, calling, doing whatever it takes, that does actually make a difference. And that wouldn't have happened if people like us weren't willing to cover those stories.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to talk to us. Talk to us, because all we really want to do is amplify your voice. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Please, if you want help, we want to help you.
Yeah, and I'll just say I 100% agree with Brielle. Journalists, we have such a a large role and carry such a large burden trying to get information out there. So when people reach out to us and we tell their stories, our job is literally to tell information to the public. So when we put information out there and it goes to the public, then the public, we get an overwhelming response from the public, and then that's when impact can be made, when more people know what's going on. Just look at this whole Black Lives Matter movement that's big. You know, somebody shared this video on social media, and then reporters started covering these stories. And now all these protests are breaking out. So I feel like journalists, they have the ability to use their platform to educate other people. And then when other people are educated, that's when people will start to get out in the streets and start to do things when they know the information, not just, you know, by reading on themselves, but also watching their local news, reading their local newspaper, going out into their communities. So I feel like journalists actually do have a huge impact on how policies can be changed, but we just can't do it by ourselves. But that's why we use our platform to get the information out there, so we can get a whole bunch of people, you know, with us to try to make the policy change and get things, you know, the way people would want them to be or their preferred preference.
Ladies, thank you so very much for having this conversation with us. I think that people learned a lot. There is a lot of appreciation for the work that you do. I think you all can feel good that your community appreciates seeing you, appreciates the work that you do. And I know that for those of you who I've met, I also appreciate the work that you do. Without your interest in the Heritage Center, some of the stuff that we do, nobody would know about. So I really appreciate that. So I applaud you all and thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Andrea, stick around. Andrea, stick around.
I'm gonna say, okay.